Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Adi. Today we have a team report from the Vancouver Regional Championships, and I am joined by another top player. I'm joined by Scott. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been a long time coming, but for those who don't know you, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a VGC player from the Seattle area. I started during the Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire days. My first year was 2016 amidst all of the crazy restricted Pokemon, but I fell in love with the game. I haven't been super active in terms of going to like traveling a ton for events up until Scarlet and Violet came out, and then I started going to more tournaments just because a little bit more time, a little bit more money. And yeah, Vancouver obviously is relatively close to me, so it was a relatively lax trip in the sense that like I didn't have to shell out a bunch of money and I had people to stay with. And honestly, I went in not with any crazy expectations. I knew the team could do well, but I was just going because it was close and it was fun and wound up going pretty well.
hmm Yeah, and I know you've been working on variants of this team for a long time for basically the entire format. It seems like. So talk me through how you got to this final product that you ended up bringing to Vancouver.
Yeah, so the team has gone through a lot of different versions. The initial idea behind the team started back before Reg F even took effect. Um, my good friend, I kind of mentioned it on stream, and I'm in the middle of writing a team report. If you like reading about that sort of thing, I have a whole narrative account of how the team sort of came about. But the short of it goes that my good friend Dimitri and I were messing around with this goofy Regidrago comfy Araquanid team, and we were getting trashed by grass and fairy types. So I was kind of not super hopeful for P2 in Reg F before I started using it. Um, but when that team came along, we were getting trashed by Fairy and Grass, and so we were like, what if we did Terra Poison, Terra Blast P2? Because that beats those things. And we were like, it's funny, like we should try it. And the rest of the team obviously was horrible. That was kind of the idea, but it was funny. But then P2 was actually doing stuff, and we are like, oh, like this is a thing that can work. And then in preparation for the Portland Regional Championships, Dimitri and I were figuring out how to make Porygon 2 balance worked. And at that tournament, Dimitri had a very similar team to this, but with Fluttermane and Iron Hands instead of the Goldango and Roaring Moon. And then I had five of these six, but with Urshifu Rapid Strike instead of the Roaring Moon. And then I brought that version. So I had that version in Portland, and then I brought a slightly different, like ever so slightly different version to Charlotte. Where the only changes that you could see in the team sheet were Goldango's Terra type being Dragon and Urshifu's Terra type being Stellar. So there were just all these different little adjustments that the team went through over time. And then some people may know it, some people may not, but the Tinglu Komo-o Fluttermane idea that we saw pop up in Europe was actually my team. Alex and Eric DM'd me before Liverpool and asked if they could have the team. And I have an open door policy when it comes to VGC generally. If people are curious about my teams, like I am not one to withhold information. So I sent it over, and they wound up using it and doing pretty well with it. Um, and then the interim period between Charlotte and Vancouver was very chaotic in terms of the team building process for me, where I thought that the team needed to change a lot and needed to do all these different things. I had a version where there was like a Suicune and an Ogerpon Cornerstone. Like I was losing my mind. Um, and then at some point, the player who placed second in the TPCI regions for the first global challenge reached out to me, and I had seen that they had used these six Pokemon. Um, the one that's like on screen right now that I eventually brought to Vancouver. And so I was like, oh, like that's interesting. Like Porygon, like P2 Balance got second in the first GC. And he reached out to me and was just like, "Yo, like I know that you know you've been working on this team. Like, would you want to like talk about it?" And we didn't do a ton of that, but he was the reason that I was like, "Huh, like I guess Roaring Moon could be a really strong slot as the sixth Pokemon." Because really, it came down to the Urshifu feeling like it wasn't quite where it needed to be after Charlotte. And so I spent some time working on it, and the spreads are really, really different from the prior tournaments and from what Lorenzo, the player that reached out to me, was doing. He had like slow Incineroar and like bulky Landorus and other stuff like that, and I wanted to go fast. So yeah, the team went through a lot of different phases. It's kind of just been my Reg F project, um, and yeah, there it is.
Yeah,
It's
it's
been
it sounds like you ended up with these six. Do you want to talk me through the Pokemon themselves and why they're trained the way they are, their items, EV spreads, etc.?
Sure. So I guess I'll just start from the top left and work my way down through the team. So the Amoonguss, part of it was just a comfort thing. I was using this exact Amoonguss spread starting in Reg D in preparation for Worlds because Chiampao was just everywhere, going around in that tournament and just in the lead up to it. So with Bold 236, 236, you give yourself the best, like among the best odds to survive Adamant Icicle Crash from Chiampao at neutral. I think in general, a lot of the team's lines against Balance and other teams that involve Chiampao or Gouging Fire really fall apart if Amoonguss is dropping. Um, if you somehow get Incineroar out of position to not be able to intimidate them. So I felt that prioritizing physical bulk was just always the way to go. I still think it kind of is because Chiampao is such a threat, especially with the resurgence of Chiampao or Shifu, fire, water, grass balance sort of things. So I definitely really, really liked the physical bulk on Amoonguss. And I'd been running Protect where Sludge Bomb was for the longest time, just out of comfort and because Protect is such a good move. And it wasn't until like a week before Vancouver that I considered running Sludge Bomb just because of how much it changes Amoonguss's 1-to-1 against opposing Ogerpon. It improves Amoonguss's independence in terms of like offense, of it's not getting walled out by Fluttermane or flying types. And it can have something to do against things holding the safety goggles like Raging Bolt or Incineroar, and is a harder punish for Terra Fairies that try to get around Landorus. So stuff like Calm Mind, Raging Bolt. Um, it wound up paying off super, super hard at the tournament. Sludge Bomb was just like, I was so glad that I made the swap. Um, and then probably the thing that people ask me the most about this team is what the Incineroar spread is doing. And I see people like watching the stream matches or people that I played against on ladder before the tournament being like, why is your instance so freaking fast? Like, they're like, what are you doing? And one of the major things about this team is that most matchups I felt were extremely winnable, like pretty much even. And it just came down to whether or not I played better than my opponent if I was better prepared. The one matchup where before changing the Incineroar spread, I felt was just next to impossible or just way too difficult for me to feel comfortable with was opposing Blood Moon Farigiraf Tornadus stuff. Because those Blood Moons go really fast, and Terra Normal Blood Moon outspeeding everything that's not, the back three of Goldengo, Landorus, and Roaring Moon. With Terra Normal Blood Moon outspeeding like the vast majority of my team, it would just shred through my defensive resources way too fast for me able to have a chance. So that is why the Incineroar is as fast as it is. It's one extra point faster so that it doesn't speed tie with the Goldengo. And that had the added benefit of meaning that I could knock off Assault Vests and then use Make It Rain or Shadow Ball as a follow up, which is cool. And then obviously just in terms of where it lands in terms of its speed tier, it meant that I was outspeeding like some Raging Bolts, and I was just always the fastest Incineroar, so I'd always have the faster Fake Out, which was a huge advantage I think for this team when certain lines and certain matchups benefit so much from getting Trick Room off. Um, the Goldengo is Metal Coat because I think it really wants the ability to OHKO opposing Flutter Mane at neutral on turn one. So the like Landorus, Flutter Mane, Booster Energy, like Speed, Flutter Mane, like Ogre Pond stuff that was running around at the time of Charlotte and was like doing pretty well at Liverpool and stuff. They started to run Taunt instead of a like Ghost instead of Shadow Ball or like Dazzling Gleam. Um, I can't necessarily confirm it, but I want to say it's because of this team, because of my team, because people were having such a hard time with the instant P2 lead if they didn't have Taunt. Um, and so when they switched to Taunt, I needed to figure out a way to deal with the Flutter Mane to still be able to enable P2. So Goldango being able to OHKO Flutter Mane was a really huge part of how this team was meant to function in that matchup. Hence all of the special attack investment and the metal coat. The defense investment was mostly just a comfort thing after a certain point, but the initial calc was for Adamant Max Attack, Terra Water, Surging Strikes um, from Urshifu, and then also it had the added benefit of surviving Adamant, Champao, Sucker Punch 15 out of 16 times. Obviously, I never really let myself get Sucker Punched, but that was just good to know. Um, the P2 spread is was also kind of a comfort thing after a certain point. It does the a slightly similar thing to Goldango in surviving the same Adamant Max Attack, Terra Water, Mystic Water, Surging Strikes, but in rain. Um, and then the special attack investment is just the max that you can go while not going too far so that you wouldn't get the physical Terra Blast from the download boost. So at 92 special attack, Porygon 2, like quiet 92 special attack, Porygon 2 hits 150 special attack stat. And with 4 attack EVs, you hit a 101 physical attack stat. So when you get the +1 boost, you're at 151. Um, so 92 was just the highest that you could go, and then the rest was in SPDF. I really felt like, and I still really feel like P2's main role, and its like key differentiator from other Trick Room setters is the fact that it can be offensive. So I'm not a huge. I understand the inclination to want to lean into the bulk really hard by going bold or calm, but I really think that the offensive set is the reason why P2 felt so good to me was because it's able to trade so favorably against so many different Pokemon by it still has amazing bulk even if you don't invest a lot into it. But when you have like the offensive investment to be able to like one shot opposing Ogerpon at +1 special attack with Terra Poison Blast, um, it really changes how the Pokemon's able to function. So I really, really liked the spread. And then the Landorus is like pretty straightforward. I felt that it was. I've been talking to people about it recently, um, and I maintain that it's really important for Landorus to outspeed Urshifu guaranteed. Um, so like they have to be Choice Scarf in order to outrun Landorus. With Rocky Helmet Amoonguss, that being the only way that they can outspeed means that Amoonguss is a lot more efficient at dealing with the Urshifu. And then Landorus always being able to outspeed means that if I break the Focus Sash on like a single strike Urshifu, then Landorus is always going to be able to get rid of it. Um, and I thought that was really important. And then obviously in more slightly like fringe matchups, I didn't run into. I don't know if I played any Chi-Yu at Vancouver, but knowing that I was going to be faster was really important to me. I think. Um, and then the Roaring Moon is another Pokemon where I was having a hard time figuring out what exactly the spread should be. I wanted this exact speed stat because I knew I really wanted the Roaring Moon to outspeed Ogerpon, and the one extra point actually made quite a bit of a difference by making sure that I always outspeed opposing Tornadus. And I had been tinkering around with having a bit more bulk by dropping some attack, but the lowest that the attack stat can go without losing the attack boost from booster energy is 164 EVs. So I don't have a ton of extra bulk to be working with, and ultimately I couldn't find any calcs in the defensive department that felt compelling for me to drop the attack investment. So I just went back to max attack. It improved Terra flying acrobatics calcs into like Terra ogre pawns and stuff like that. So I felt that it was worth it, and it did honestly more damage in the tournament than I could have expected. And there were never really times where I was missing the bulk that would have come from dropping that attack. So everything really worked out. And overall, the really great thing about this team that I kind of realized when talking to Sohybe actually um, was that in pretty much every matchup, I always knew where my speed tiers were relative to my opponent. I always knew I was going to have the faster Incineroar and that I was always going to outspeed Blood Moon. My Roaring Moon is always outspeeding your Tornadus, is always outspeeding your Ogre Pawn. My Landorus is always outspeeding your Urshifu if it's not Scarf. And my P2 is always underspeeding everything in that like base 60, 50 speed tier because none of them are going min speed. So coming out of the tournament, I felt very good about pretty much everything about the team. And I guess the last thing I should mention is Terra types. Fairy was just the best way that Goldengo could have against opposing Dark Urshifu. I didn't really play that many in Vancouver, but it was just a good blanket defensive type. I think in Reg F, Fairy is just the best all-purpose, take neutral from everything and not be weak to too many other things type. Um, so that worked out pretty well. And then I know people really like safety goggles like Terra Ghost Incineroar, but I'm just super citrus pilled, and I've always liked Citrus Incineroar over safety goggles just because of how more consistently valuable it is. If there's no Amoonguss, then I basically just don't have an item, and I never really liked that. And the grass typing is still really nice defensively for being able to Terra against Ogre Pawn and other stuff like that. So I felt very good about all the decisions that were made in team building for this team.
Yeah. And so you've been using, variants of this team. You used 5 of the same 6 Pokemon at Charlotte Regionals, a couple months ago. How much of these EV spreads were comfort, or did you try to reassess all these EV spreads and these choices before every tournament?
I pretty much always spend a period of time before each tournament reassessing the EV spreads. Um, there was an extent to which they were comfort, but also when I would go into the calculator and look at what the spreads were doing, it was still just doing all the things that I needed them to. So it was a combination of like I know how this works, and also I don't think I've fallen behind in terms of like where the meta is trending towards. So yeah.
Makes sense. And then you said that a number of people reached out to you about potentially using the team at the European Championships, and so you want to talk about how to actually use the team. So for people who might want to steal the team, I know I'm looking at this team as potentially a team I might steal for some locals this month. How do you actually play the team? What are your tips and tricks to using it?
So part of the challenge with giving blanket advice about the team is that it's meant to just be like a Swiss Army knife sort of team where it gives the player the tools to outplay the opponent. And there are some like established lines against certain teams that are a bit more flowcharty. So like Psy Spam and other things like that. Um, and even then, there's still an element of being able to adapt on the fly and kind of just like pick and choose what Pokemon you think should be like coming to the matchup. I guess the best blanket advice that I can give, I guess a few things of this team can do damage quickly, but also like it's Incineroar Porygon to Amoonguss, and against opposing balance, the games can get like pretty drawn out. Um, and being able to position Incineroar and Amoonguss in P2 is just like the key to making this team work. Um, so like I don't know if people have talked about it on Tub or like in these team reports before, but I have sort of like a theorem when it comes to Incineroar where there's like three like rankings of where Incineroar is positioned the strongest. Of like the strongest position for Incineroar is probably it honestly might be a tie between it being on the field with fake out accessible and it being in the back. And then the last one is being on the field without fake out available. So I prioritize having Incineroar pivoting off the field a lot. Um, like sometimes I'll click parting shot into a slot, even though I don't necessarily need the stat drop into it. I need the switch out, and I want it to be like a slow switch out, so the thing that's coming in isn't getting hit. Um, so like the Japan balance team, I think is a good example of where the team has to operate really precisely. Um, Landorus, Porygon 2, Incineroar, Mungus are probably the most effective four Pokemon default that I would recommend for that for that team. And then from there, it's really just about like making sure that your position is calibrated in order to account for like the Urshifu switching in. The if you KO a Pokemon, you have to make sure that you're not putting yourself at risk of putting Champao on the board without the option to intimidate it and other stuff like that. Um, so those are all really important. Um, Tinglu Dondozo is a matchup that I know people have asked me about, and that isn't necessarily immediately intuitive to people. Kind of the interesting thing about people looking at the team in the past has been when there was the Tinglu and the Komao, people kind of missed the fact that this team is not a Tinglu Komao team. It's not a Roaring Moon Landorus Goldengo team. It's a Porygon Incineroar Mungus team. Um, that being said, there are plenty of matchups where you can't necessarily just autopilot lead Incin P2 Amoonguss and have one of the other three guys in the back. Um, like against Tinglu Dondozo, you really have to lean into Goldengo because the Tinglu and the Dondozo are really annoying for the P2 and Amoonguss because they can just taunt you, Sand Tomb you, and you just are not trading favorably at all. Um, so like my match on stream against Cheppa, um, Goldengo just like kind of has to pop off, which I got it to do. But knowing that you have to lead in like Goldengo plus probably Incineroar to deal with the damage that's going into the Goldengo slot and to make sure that you don't uh, aren't simultaneously setting up nasty plot and also trying to do things with Amoonguss because then the timing gets wonky because Amoonguss gets trapped in and put to sleep by Santum Yon and stuff. Um, I know I'm not being very precise about my prescriptions about how to necessarily play certain matchups. The where the my advice as like a general way to use the team begins and ends is just to be familiar with your matchups, um, and to experiment with different ideas that revolve around things that aren't like the most intuitive lines. So like another example is Chi Fluttermane, where I've taken to leading Roaring Moon Incineroar to bait out a move from the Fluttermane and then force Chi to lock into a move that's not overheat, and then position P2 to get Trick Room off. And there's just all these like weird lines that the team has to take sometimes. Um, yeah,
So
if there's any specific matchups that you're curious about, I can totally like respond to those.
yeah, so I guess I think that the team is a relatively defensive, more than a relatively defensive team, a very defensive team, I'd say. And so it's always going to have a lot of positional play, and there's a lot of there's a lot of it seems like there's going to be a lot of play to matchups, so you can't just say just do this, lead this, do this.
Right.
It's not like Snow is a team that maybe you can pull that off on. Certainly not this. Uh, and
Mhm.
so I'm curious if there are Pokemon, individual Pokemon that you see in team preview or individual Pokemon sets in the open team sheet that you might see and say, oh, I have to play around this in a very specific way. I have to keep these resources alive, or like I only have one way to knock this Pokemon out. I only have one defense switches. What are some problem points that you have for this team?
So I think the easiest example is Taunt, both on Fluttermane and on Tornadus. Um, Taunt just gets in the way of like all of the support options that the team kind of leans on in order to maneuver into favorable positions. So like Trick Room, Rage Powder, and Spore. There have been times where like getting out of position against a taunt Pokemon means that the Urshifu hits the board on the wrong time, and I'm not able to redirect their Surging Strikes and stuff like that. Um, so knowing how to navigate is kind of weird. Both it's been difficult for me to figure out at times, but I think I have some like good suggestions. The main answer usually is to involve Goldengo to because all of the taunt Pokemon generally really don't like Goldengo. Um, so obviously like Tornadus and the booster energy like Flutter Mains really don't like having to deal with Goldengo. And the game plan generally revolves around take out the taunt guy so that the rest of the team can function the way that it's supposed to. So against like taunt Fluttermane plus Landorus, I prioritize just getting off a neutral make it rain into the Fluttermane while they try and taunt something. And then once taunt is out of the picture, then the team can kind of maneuver around things pretty easily. I remember playing Shilyang in was it was in round 10 of Charlotte, and he had the booster energy taunt Fluttermane, and I just led Amoonguss Goldengo, and out of fear of me clicking Make It Rain Spore against the Sublandorus, he just attacked with both Pokemon, and I was able to redirect the Earth Power and just click Make It Rain and get rid of Fluttermane, and then from there the game was pretty simple. And I think similar principles hold up against opposing Tornadus because you can use Ice Beam, you can use Make It Rain, and like knock off from Roaring Moon to get rid of it, and then P2's life becomes a lot easier. Um, so that's kind of one of the less intuitive matchups that requires a bit more finagling. But my advice would be to lean into the Goldengo. Um, and then the other one, it's kind of weird because on paper, I remember when Wolf's team surfaced. I was obviously looking at the matchup against him in preparation for day two of Charlotte, and I was like, I think this is a pretty good matchup because Incineroar does really well against Hearthflame, Ogerpon, and Incin and Rillaboom, and then I have Amoonguss to be annoying to the Urshifu and stuff like that. Um, the problem though is that Swords Dance makes it really easy for Incin to lose pacing against it. And with the immunity to Spore, like once it gets the Sword Stance up, it can kind of just ignore Amoonguss. This was obviously before I had Sludge Bomb, so that changes things a bit. But just the fact that Swords Dance Ogerpon next to something that can shut down my Incineroar makes it really easy for the team to get out of position at times. Um, that was part of why I really liked Roaring Moon as an inclusion on the team after Charlotte was my concerns like regarding opposing Hearthflame Ogerpon. Um, so my general advice there is just that you should pretty much always be leading Incineroar against those like really powerful physical attackers. Being able to time Intimidate and Parting Shot into those slots so that you aren't eating huge Ivy Cudgels and stuff like that is a really big part of the way that the team works. Granted, like those are pretty balancy type matchups, so like the onus is on the player to be able to outposition. So it's not exactly like straightforward or easy. Um, but the priority usually revolves around making sure that Incineroar is always in the right position to switch into the Ivy Cudgel or be have enough Intimidates and Parting Shots down that the Pokemon next to it can maybe terrastalize or is just safe in general. Um, Trying to think if there's anything else. Glamora can be a little cumbersome because the goal generally is to knock off its power herb before it gets to use Meteor Beam. But next to something with Taunt that prevents me from setting Trick Room, like Tornadus, can make things a little bit uncomfortable. Um, but Goldengo has a really good matchup into that 1v1. It gets complicated when they have a flying or a fire type that does really well against Goldengo, so it's like there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on with the team, and like there is an element of like giving yourself the best odds to not be behind off the lead. Um, so yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah. This, and then I guess before we talk about your tournament experience, was there anything else that you wanted to cover when we were talking about the team?
Don't expect to be doing well with it when you pick it up straight off the bat. It's not an easy team to use. Kind of as you alluded to, Adi, like it is a very like hard defensive balance team that relies on the player being familiar with how to position the individual Pokemon. So like when you time Incineroar intimidates, when you decide to click fake out or parting shot on the turns that you have fake out available is really important. Um, hard like knowing when to hard switch and click parting shot is a really important skill. So like against Howl Pokemon, if you lead Incineroar, generally it's like not worth it to stay on the field. So like against Ogerpon Gouging Fire, uh it's better to hard switch out the Incineroar because they can Howl and Ivy Cudgel the Incineroar, and you can't stop both. So it's better in terms of timing to have Incineroar in the back to be able to intimidate after the Howl. So like there's a lot of really nuanced stuff about how to position the team. So the last thing I guess I will say about like piloting the team is if people have questions that my DMs are open and that I always answer people in full detail. If you want to know something about how to play a matchup, like I will always, talk to you about it. Um, it's hard to, you know, fit in all of the like ideas and game plans and stuff that goes into using this team in such a short time. So one, if you have questions, reach out to me, and two, look out for my full length written team report.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, look out for that. That hopefully, a lot of those have just like simple matchup guides too, which is always really helpful. But
Mhm.
yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And with that, let's talk about the tournament run that you had. I will say, I think it's funny that most people come on the channel and they're like, "Hey, use my team; it's super cool," and you're like, "You are not good enough to use my team. Try something easier."
Well, so I'm cool with people like trying the team. The thing is like, I've talked to like a number of people is in that like, and I think I'm okay to say that like I think that the experience that I racked up over the course of the format is part of what allowed me to get as far as I did in Vancouver. Of like, I don't think people that are picking up the team will pilot it to the same degree that I was in Vancouver. Um, Not to say that you can't do well with it, but that it has some growing pains.
Hmm? No,
Yeah.
absolutely, and we saw that throughout this tournament, right? We saw James win the tournament with a team that he was so comfortable with, had been using it for the entire format, played it better than anyone else did, right? We saw Michael
Mhm.
get top four with a really weird team that he had been perfecting for the period of over a month, right? So I think the comfort really is king, especially at this point in a more national dex format. And you really showcased that. You I mean, I was looking at your schedule. I did not realize how difficult your schedule was. That's an insane run in day one.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so yeah, you clearly really knew what you were doing with this team, and you had to play out of your mind to go 8-1 against this sort of schedule. So yeah, tell me a little bit about your tournament run, and a couple highlight games from each day.
Yeah. So the one thing that I will say real quickly to respond to the whole comfort thing is that I think Reg F is among the most chaotic formats that we've ever had, just in the sense that there are so many different kinds of teams viable, which is, I guess, sort of characteristic of such a dense and like big Pokedex. There are so many like high stat Pokemon now and so many different options, that my philosophy towards it has always just been like, if you know how to play a team and it's not bad, use that team because like it really comes down to who's the better player at the table. Um, but yeah. So in terms of the run itself, I guess in terms of highlight games, I had a very close set with Colin in round one, and it was a fraudulent win. I will put it out there, and we both know it. We reached an end game in game three where it was Porygon 2 at low at low HP, taunted with Sand Tomb on it, and for the first time in the entire set, I clicked Ice Beam, and it froze. And Porygon 2 was at 49 HP. it takes 24 from Sand recoil. Tinglu stayed frozen for 2 turns, and I was freed from Sand chip with 1 health, recovered to half, and then 2 it KO'd from there. And I was so that was a very fraudulent win. Uh, but it was also just like, wow, okay, P2, thank you. Um, and then the rest of the day, I guess in terms of highlights, I wasn't necessarily expecting it to go necessarily this way, but Roaring Moon popped off like so much harder than I could have expected. It won me my round three. I lost game two because I had like a guaranteed win condition, but they got a double protect. They only had flying weak Pokemon left, but one of them was a Scarf Urshifu, and then uh, hitting into the double protect lost me my position against it. Um, but Roaring Moon still clutched it out. I guess one of the things that I didn't mention about the team is that Roaring Moon is just like as a linchpin in a lot of different matchups because of where it lands speed wise. It outspeeding Ogerpon and Landorus is a really powerful tool for the team that didn't used to have when it was still the Urshifu, and that wound up paying huge dividends against my round three opponent and against Alberto in round seven. Um, Having no intimidate on Alberto's team meant that I could like very easily get Moon into position to just start mowing through the whole team. And booster energy +1 knockoff in Sword of Ruin. O code is Raging Bolt, and so I was very happy to have stuck with max attack because I wasn't super confident that I would have gotten the KO if I had anything less than max attack. Um, and that was pretty cool. Um, and then my match against Chuppa on stream was pretty fun. I was very comfortable and familiar with this matchup. I had played it against it a ton on ladder before the tournament had happened, and I got the sense that Chuppa wasn't very familiar with the matchup. Um, and obviously, like I think he did the best that he could with what lines he could come up with on the fly, but he just didn't necessarily know how to best manage the Goldango. On top of that, I felt that I was just like super locked in and I got all the calls right. So it was like I already think that this matchup is in my favor. And then Chuppa was like trying to figure out what to do on the fly. I was getting all the calls right and I knew the matchup. So it was like kind of just uh
Yeah.
it wasn't like not to say it was like easy or anything, but it was like
Well,
I felt very confident going in.
you also had just had played Colin earlier in the day, so you had some experience literally earlier that day against one of the people who Choppa worked with. So that definitely helps.
Yes. And then my last round of day one was against the one matchup that I was hoping to dodge in day one. And it's the reason why my Incineroar was as fast as it was. And this was another case of it's interesting because I don't think that my team does very much like matchup rouletting, but within the context of a singular matchup, if my opponent doesn't have or doesn't know like what the best lines are necessarily, I feel like my team can kind of run away with things. So generally against this matchup, um, the key problem is when they lead Ursaluna plus Tornadus, because they can boost the speed of Ursaluna to outrun my Incineroar. They still have the option to Terra Normal Blood Moon to blow something up. Um, and I have to be constantly worried about Farigiraf switching in to block a potential fake out. So like if I go for fake out and they switch in for a giraffe, I could just lose immediately. If I parting shot into the Ursaluna hoping that they switch out into for a giraffe, then I could lose immediately if they just click Tailwind. So there's a lot of volatility off of that lead, but my opponent never actually led those two together. And so I made an adjustment acknowledging that and leaned into the Goldango mode of the team and just kind of blew through them in games one and three. I dropped game two because I thought that they would make an adjustment that they didn't wind up making. And the volatility of the matchup doesn't really allow for mistakes like that. So, uh, yeah, but in general, on day one, I felt pretty locked in. My one loss was to the Volcarona take on Japan Balance, and the the really stupid part of this set was that I think this set legitimately took a whole hour. There were like 30 people standing around us when we were done because we were the last match to finish by like 10 minutes. Game one went to time, and my opponents on both sides of me had finished before we had finished game one. Um, so game one went to time because no one was killing anyone. Um, and game two, I won pretty cleanly by leaning into Landorus a bit better. And then game three, my opponent adjusted by bringing Volcarona and setting up Quiver Dance early. And I wasn't active enough in punishing him. Uh, and then still, the game went to time. The last turn of the game was the first KO. And it was only because of a critical hit onto my Amoonguss. So that was pretty funny. But the the thing to of note about this was that like in the balance mirror, um, one, you have to be like managing your position really carefully, and then two, also like there comes a point where you have to start being aggressive so that the game can progress. Generally, my team is moving second in a lot of these matchups because I have the slower balance pieces in Amoonguss and Porygon 2. Um, so that generally means that I'm at a disadvantage if the game starts going to time. Um, so yeah, but that being said, I got the run back against Ale in day two, and it went much better.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about day two. So you went 8-1 in day one, so you were in a pretty good spot. Tell me about your run in day two.
Right. So in day two, it's tough because I all of the matchups like I felt very comfortable with. Not necessarily against. I wasn't necessarily familiar with the matchups against Aaron or Marcus. But just like my experience with the team and knowing how I could force certain slots to do certain things, I felt confident in those matchups. I was kind of kicking myself against Neil because I think I got a little too in my head about like how Neil would play against me. He had been kind of saying that people were eyeing my team ahead of the tournament and trying to come up with lines. And so part of it was that I was overestimating the kinds of counterplays that he was trying to come up with in the game, and I made made positions just a little bit more complicated than I think they needed to be, and was playing defensively in spots where I probably could have just attacked and other things like that. And I just kind of slowly got edged out of that game. Generally, like when I look at this team, I think that the matchup is supposed to be in my favor. Terra Poison Porygon 2 plus Incineroar just kind of, I think, when it's properly managed, just like demolishes this team because of the lack of Swords Dance on Ogerpon. Like, I just need one Intimidate, and then I can kind of move my pieces around at will without having to worry about what the Ogerpon is doing. Um, but like Neil played cleanly, and I wasn't necessarily like making the correct aggressive calls. Um, and yeah, just slowly edged out of the set. But I didn't feel badly about the way that I played. I just knew that um, with a slightly clearer head that I would have been able to find the right lines. But it wasn't, it's not a bad loss.
I mean, you were
Um,
talking about some of the pain points in general, and you mentioned taunt. Well, we got taunt and tornadoes here. You mentioned fire
yeah,
ogre pawn, and we got fire ogre pawn here. So it seems like there's definitely a lot of things that that could make this matchup a lot more difficult, especially if you hadn't thought about it ahead of time.
right. Um, so yeah, that was my one loss in day two Swiss. And then I had already been thinking about what I would do in the run back against Ale, and I adjusted by bringing Roaring Moon. Um, Reading that he would probably bring Volcarona because of how well it worked in game three of our previous set. And then he got out of position. His Incineroar was out of position to be able to deal with Roaring Moon in the mid game. And I just started clicking acrobatics and blowing stuff up. Um, and so that was really good. And then I think game three, it came down to like a minor call where he could have protected and switched in a fake out mon, but it was really obvious, so he decided not to do it, and I wound up being able to KO the Volcarona. Um, in general, like a clean set, but I think that I've talked about it a good amount where like if you get the run back against a player, you would much rather be in the position of having lost that first set, because adjusting from a loss is a lot easier than adjusting from a win. Um, and that's kind of how I felt when I had to play Brady in top four. Of like when we played in Swiss, like I kind of stomped him. Like neither game was really close. I think they were both 4-0s, and I had like pretty much all of my HP on like every single Pokemon. Um, so going into my match with him in top four, I was like, I was like, I know he's gonna adjust. I just don't necessarily know exactly how, and um, and I'll get to why I think I lost that top four set, but just kind of like getting the run back coming from a loss is generally more advantageous than having won the first game. Um, so yeah. Against Aaron, uh, I just felt like I think I played really well against Aaron, where I was positioning Incineroar and Amoonguss to be able to like force spores onto pretty much his entire team. Um, and then from there, I was able to get Goldengo set up and just start clicking Make It Rain. That is kind of the marquee weakness of the Crest Bear team in the matchup against me is that you generally have to give up some turns to let Goldengo set up and hope that you're okay. Um, Against Aaron, like Goldengo getting set up really was just kind of the nail in the coffin. And then also my Incineroar, his Ursaluna was pretty fast because it's meant to take advantage of Tailwind and Icy Wind. But it's still not faster than my Incineroar. So I was able to like parting shot off of it before it got to headlong rush me, and I knocked off his Flame Orb in game two before he was able to attack. Um, so yeah. And then match against Marcus on stream was a good set. Roaring Moon again came in pretty clutch. Um, like I mentioned before, like it improving the speed tiers of the team was really important. And then obviously, like in this matchup, if he ever Terra bugs, then Moon's just in a really good position to start blowing through things. And that's basically what happened. And then top eight against Brandon was another just like it was just all the Roaring Moon show. It outspeeds every single Pokemon on this team and threatens Okos onto the vast majority of them, if not all of them except for Ursaluna. Um, and game one, I have my notes on what I brought here. I brought Moon to both games. It was just a pretty clean 2-0. And a really nice thing about the Psy Spam matchup is that, like, if they lead the Psy Spam stuff, then a lot of times Roaring Moon can choose whether or not to KO Indeedee with knockoff, or I can delay the KO by using acrobatics, which is sometimes really annoying for them because then Indeedee and Gallade can get stuck on the field in front of a Goldengo, and being able to switch into their hard hitters um, is just like really awkward without like taking a ton of damage or just like losing the Pokemon entirely. Um, and then Sludge Bomb Amoonguss was really valuable in this matchup for being able to hit Terra Grass, Gallade harder, and punish the Ogerpon in the back when Terra was already up. And then game two, he led Iron Moth and Didi, and I led Roaring Moon. And he tried to get off a Helping Hand Heat Wave into my Goldango, and I clicked Knock Off into Moth, and it just died. And then that was kind of just the game. Like I clicked knock off into Moth, it died, and I set up nasty plot, and then he was just really far behind. And Yeah, and then I guess the very last thing was that my set against Brady, I had been saying to people that I was not super confident about the run back because I had stomped him so hard in Swiss. And reviewing the match, I'm obviously seeing all the things that I could have done differently. Um, but the biggest thing that I could say is that like Brady just plays super safe and clean. Um, and it requires being aggressive in order to edge him out. And I just like didn't make the right calls in the heat of the moment.
Hmm. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, just a really incredible run overall. Going to what 12-2 in over the course of Swiss, and then losing, like you said, against the a very very good player using a team that you'd already played once before that day. And so
Hmm.
yeah, and I think it's been super cool to watch you use this team and use variants of this team so consistently, really consistently push the envelope on the metagame, I guess. Push the push the way that this sort of construction has been built, and really drive
Right.
that. So it's been really cool to see all season. Thank you for coming on the channel and telling us about the culmination of this, and maybe the hopefully close to perfected version of this team. I can't. Are you going to more events this format?
I'm actually not going to any more events for the rest of the season, as far as I'm aware.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just money problems and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
My one thing is that I'm going to probably make like a little mini local push to get my Worlds invite to Flex.
Hell yeah.
Um, because I'm 60 points off, and it would be pretty simple.
Yeah, it's easy. Well, I hope at the very least that maybe we can see you in Hawaii then. Um, but yeah,
It's pretty unlikely unless a good chunk of money falls in my lap. I probably won't be there. But
all right. Well, well, in that case, you got the big chunk of money from the top four finish at Vancouver Regional, so maybe that might help. But yeah,
it doesn't hurt, but it would also be nice to be able to pocket that money. But
absolutely. Yeah. No. But again, like I said, it's been super cool to watch you develop this team over the course of the season, and I'd say try it out, but Scott might tell you not to. It's
I didn't say not to. I just said that it won't be easy.
it is definitely one of the strongest teams in the format. I will say that, and leave trying it out to you. But as per usual, we got the rental code on screen, and we'll have the paste in the description down below. Scott, thank you again.
Just as a disclaimer, I would encourage people to try it, but when you inevitably come to some roadblocks, that you can come to me for advice, that I will help you.
There you go. There you go. Maybe if enough people try it and can't figure out how to use it, you can offer them coaching, and then go to Worlds.
Ah.
See, we're getting there.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks again for coming on the channel and being a good sport about it. And yeah, like I said, definitely recommend you try this team out. Any final
Thanks
words?
for having me.
Yeah, any final words or shout outs that you want to give?
Yeah, well, thanks to you, Adi, for having me on the channel. I've been looking forward to being able to feature a report for a while, so this is very fun. I'm glad we got to do this. In terms of shout outs to Lorenzo, who messaged me about the Roaring Moon version that he used in the Global Challenge. Um, I don't necessarily know if I never would have been able to find the Roaring Moon idea, but being able to talk to Lorenzo, I was like, oh, like I get this and it makes sense, and I think this is where the team should probably go. Shout outs to Dimitri for being a jokester just like me and thinking that Terra Poison P2 would be funny. Some of the best ideas come from the least serious moments, so and he is a source of a lot of those. So yeah. And then shout outs to the members of all of my, Discord. Shout outs to Tub. Uh, really appreciated all the support during the tournament run at Vancouver, and anybody that provided input or practice when preparing the team. It helped a lot.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming on, and congratulations again on your incredible run at Vancouver. And yeah, until next time, I will see you all later.